Welcome to this lesson introducing different leadership models. In this lesson we will introduce you to a variety of different leadership models used by different leaders at different times and in different situations. During this lesson we expect that you will gain the following learning and insights. First, you will be exposed to different leadership models that have been developed in recent decades, the basic premise of each of these models, and the commonalities across the different models. Second, by the end of the lesson, you will understand the difference between having and exercising authority, and exercising leadership. And third, you will feel encouraged to increase your own personal use of informal authority to exercise leadership in your own professional roles. Before we get into exploring the different leadership models that exist out there, let's begin by thinking about what leadership means to us, a little closer to home. Here are some guiding questions to help you think through this. Take a few moments to reflect on. What does leadership mean to you? When have you seen an example of effective leadership and what did that look like to you? When have you seen an example of failed leadership and what did that look like to you? And, lastly, what behaviors would you like to see more of in your own leadership and in other leaders? Pause here for a couple of minutes and think of a person and a situation where you observed effective leadership in action, and then try to understand what it was that made this person and what they did so effective. Try to also do the same activity in your mind of a situation and person where you thought the leadership was ineffective and could have been improved. Why was it ineffective and what might you have done differently? To start us off, one quote that summarizes very well the study and practice of leadership is from a man named James MacGregor Burns who wrote a book called Leadership many years ago in 1978. He says that leadership is one of the most observed and least understood phenomena in the world. If we had a moment to discuss all the examples people thought of when answering the questions in the previous slide, we would likely come up with lots of different ways of leading and behaving as a leader. So it can be challenging to narrow this down. Yet, what is very clear, is that we often know it when we see it. We know when we see effective leaders in action, and when we see ineffective leaders at work. But it can be hard to identify and pin down exactly what makes the most effective leadership in different situations, by different leaders and at different times. Since James MacGregor Burns' landmark piece, there have been numerous studies, observations and reflections on the practice of leadership. There have been many people who have dedicated many years of their lives to the practice and theory of understanding leadership. They have focused on trying to understand in great detail what it is that makes a good leader, so that they can pass that wisdom on to others. Exploring leadership has been a major focus for both private and public sector organizations because it is so closely tied to the success of any organization's attempt to lead and manage reform to help them stay relevant to the changing times, and to become more effective in serving their clients or citizens. Here you can see just a small, but prominent, sample of the many thousands of books written on leadership and the different models and theories that have been developed, for example, adaptive leadership, servant leadership, transformational leadership, tribal leadership, primal leadership. Here, you can see a short list of different leadership models that are most helpful for leading public sector reform efforts in government. It's definitely not an exhaustive list, but it captures some of the most prominent, well-practiced and respected leadership models of the last 50 years or so. They include transformational leadership, servant leadership, adaptive, collaborative and heroic leadership. In the next part of this lesson, we will provide a brief explanation of several of these and some important factors that are common across them all. The transformational leadership model was developed in 1994 by authors Bass and Evolio. It focuses on creating a culture of continuous and adaptive change that will, over time, lead to major or transformational change. What is transformational change? It's a major change or series of changes in an organization. It requires changes in both hearts and in minds of the people in the organization, changes in strategy and structures and processes, as well as culture. It usually is triggered by major changes in the environment external to the organization that require adaptation in order to stay relevant in an evolving world. In a public sector environment, this model is sometimes attempted when there have been very bad failures of services, and the government consider that everything needs to change from the top down. Some examples of transformational leaders are Mahatma Gandhi, who inspired and led broad sweeping changes in mindset and culture, on a large scale in India. Bill Gates and Steve Jobs of Microsoft and Apple are other examples of transformational leaders who revolutionized the way people communicate with each other and how they use telephones and computers. A very important factor in this model is the focus on fostering an environment for employees that provides space and opportunity for experimentation, and a culture that is accepting of failure. This creates a sense of psychological safety for staff members, which leads to trust and increases productivity through the greater creativity and innovation that is allowed. The main components of the model can be summarized as the 4 I's, which are visualized here. First, in the green, is idealized influence. This means that the leader provides a role model for highly ethical behavior, instills pride, gains trust and respect. Second, in the yellow, is inspirational motivation, meaning that the leader articulates a vision that inspires, motivates, energizes others, and attracts others to follow them. Third, in the red, is intellectual stimulation, meaning that the leader stimulates new ideas, innovation and creativity by seeking everyone's ideas, by challenging assumptions and taking risks. And, fourth, is individualized consideration, meaning that the leader becomes aware of and tries to address each of their followers' needs and concerns, in the style of a coaching or mentoring approach. Given all of these points, it's important to know that this model is unlikely to succeed when applied in an environment where there is no space or opportunity for experimentation, and/or where there is a fear or ridiculing or of failure. Next, we'll look briefly into the servant leadership model. This model has its roots in both Eastern and Western cultures, and religions. It's considered a timeless model as this approach is known to have existed in ancient cultures. In this model, the leader starts with the mindset of being a servant first. He or she focuses on the needs of others before their own needs and ambitions, and their main desire is to serve others. This servant leader provides benefits to both his or her staff and organization, as well as their beneficiaries or clients, by thinking and acting in service of others and by putting people ahead of power. A couple of examples of servant leaders are Mother Teresa, who was in constant service of the sick, poor and needy in India, but never cared about the awards she won for her service, including the Nobel Prize for Peace. Yet she continues to inspire future leaders into service. Martin Luther King Jr. is another example from the USA. He led a nonviolent movement in the fight for social justice and equal rights for others, always keeping the focus on how he was helping them, rather than the fame and accolades he was granted for his work. Servant leaders are known to be enablers. This means that they try to empower and lift up those who work around them. They ask questions of others and share decision-making with their staff to naturally capture and utilize all the skills and knowledge of their team members. They try to develop and enhance the skill sets of their staff so they may grow and become more influential and effective over time. This also helps to keep their staff focused on their motivations and contributions to the mission of the organization. Trust is an essential component in the success and effectiveness of the servant leadership model because the leaders must trust that the employees are worth serving, that is, they are motivated, hard-working, passionate about the mission of the organization and competent, in order to know that the staff and the organization will benefit from their service. In turn, this model ideally fosters trust towards page 10. The leader as they provide an environment of work that is open, inclusive, respectful and a role model for serving and supporting one another. In our changing times, this model is increasingly of interest in public sector organizations. We all face increased pressure from citizens, the media and stakeholders to be more responsive to the needs of the public, and transparent in our dealings with them. Let's turn now to the collaborative leadership model. It has much in common with the transformational and servant leadership models just presented. This model is particularly helpful when a problem or challenge or reform agenda is complex, and which no single individual can solve on their own. It is necessary to bring other individuals, teams, or organizations on board to make progress. And more minds, with more knowledge and experience, on the issue can improve chances of coming up with a common purpose and goal, and a more effective solution to implement. In addition, the focus is heavily on involving everyone in decision-making and problem-solving. This helps create buy-in and a sense of ownership over the work, meaning they will develop a common purpose together and all feel more committed to implementing and achieving it together. Further, everyone works together on an equal footing. Through working together and communicating openly and with trust, it can help avoid turf disputes in teams as everyone is collaborating towards the same goal. Collaborative leadership is based upon an open process, facilitated by the leader, that encourages dialogue and transparent communication, which builds trust in working and collaborating together. Overall, it can be described as a model that is focused on leadership of a collaborative way of working, rather than leadership of people. Leaders subordinate their own egos to support the collaborative process to get everyone involved, and they typically share the credit for any success with everyone that was involved in the work. We will explore more later in this program, in Lesson 19, about how collaboration can help towards achieving results. Yet, it's important to bear in mind it's not appropriate in all situations. For example, it may not be effective in situations where one needs to act with deep urgency, as collaborative decision-making and action takes more time. And it may also not work very well in teams or organizations where people cannot openly discuss conflict and mediate it to reach a solution that would be acceptable to everyone. Next, we'll turn to the heroic leadership model. This model sits in contrast to collaborative leadership as it focuses on one individual leading all others to success. The model relies on a hero to appear and take the role of leadership, and for that one individual to responsibly and effectively lead all others to success or safety. This model is for the most part considered somewhat outdated in many situations now. However, there are some situations where it may still be useful, such as in situations of crisis, war, or a natural disaster where someone needs to get things done fast, and there is no time to discuss and collaborate with many other parties. This model has been used to great extent in the military because of the need for clear command in cases of life and death urgency. In the heroic leadership model, on the left side, the leader is responsible, and they provide direction on what to do to everyone. They sit at the top of the hierarchy and manage the group or team, and they do so through influencing downward through the hierarchy, providing direction to others. The challenge with this model is, what if no hero appears at the right time? We need them to solve all our problems? Another challenge is that there is often no shared ownership of the work, and there is no real focus on improving capacities to develop others into the leadership role. People keep looking towards the hero to solve their problems, and this creates a further reliance on the hero to keep leading and solving problems into the future. You will hear more from Professor Matt Andrews at Harvard on why heroic leadership rarely works in development projects once you reach Lesson 18 on learning from and scaling your projects. In response to that, we now mostly consider ourselves to aspire to work under a post-heroic leadership model, which you can see as the diagram on the right-hand side. It focuses on everyone being responsible for developing and implementing a solution or reform, more aligned with the collaborative leadership model. Together the leaders and team members create a tangible vision and share responsibility for its implementation and achievement. And, lastly, they influence one another peer-to-peer, not only a downward influence by the leader. And lastly, at least for the purposes of this lesson, is the adaptive leadership model, which was developed within Harvard University in collaboration with public sector agencies. It was developed by people working in the public sector to help other people working in the public sector, and it tries to address challenges faced specifically in government work. It involves mobilizing people to adapt and succeed in tackling tough challenges. This means getting people engaged, getting the right people on the job at the right time, getting the right resources to get the job done, and motivating people to keep going when things get tough. In contrast to the heroic leadership model just discussed, it involves thinking about leadership as an activity that everyone needs to exercise rather than a focus on just one heroic individual. It means becoming comfortable with uncertainty. Leaders are often confronted with new challenges or situations they have never worked on before, but they must remain focused, and become adaptable and comfortable with making decisions then moving forward in a state of uncertainty. Adaptive leadership requires trusting staff to do the best that they know how to do, allowing them to make decisions in the moment, and exercising leadership from the lower levels, not only from the top of the hierarchy. And lastly, but very importantly, adaptive leadership is very much focused on learning, step by step, through doing. When leaders face new challenges without a clear solution, they won't always get it right first time. But they do their best, and if it works, they take note of what has worked, and keep moving forward. If it doesn't go well, they see what didn't go well and adjust as soon as they can to get back on the right track again. Please take time to watch this 4-minute clip on the adaptive leadership model. It highlights one of the biggest questions leaders face on a regular basis: what should I do? And shares the key messages of the model to help leaders navigate their way through complex challenges.
Adaptive leadership explained in less than 4 minutes. No matter our position, our role, our context, for each of us the opportunity for leadership is on the other side of the question, what should I do? An important first step in personal leadership is then to understand our own purpose and the alignment of our own purpose with the work we're doing. Imagine being able to see everything, all the things we know in our organization to be true, all the facts we can collect, all the things we see. In one simple gaze, this is the pool of data, our reality of our own context. But it's a place we don't spend much time in because we want to leap into action. But when we win the urge to get things done immediately and start entertaining multiple interpretations of what we see, multiple explanations of what happens, little by little we climb up a ladder. We start seeing more than one thing, more than one reason, more than one way things are. We are on our way to the balcony, above the day-to-day fray, a fresh new perspective where we begin to see differently. Two very distinct kinds of work get into focus from the balcony. A kind of work is dealing with technical problems, the expertise-driven deliverables that require efficient execution based on current know-how, control, following of procedures. The technical work is the work that you do every day for 90% of the time in your day-to-day job. For this work, clear authority structures provide a routine of protection, order, and direction. Great work like this is performed every day through procedures, plans, known responses in every organization. Yet, this is not the work of leadership. There is another kind of work, much smaller and much harder to make out and very murky, is the work of dealing with adaptive challenges. A very different kind of work we don't have yet an instruction manual for. Work for which much more than a quick fix is required. Work that requires people to rethink their own values, loyalties, and habits. This is the work of leadership, and the only way out is engaging consciously and collectively in learning, unlearning, and relearning to build what's next in the middle of uncertainty and ambiguity. Now, this work is no more than 10% of what you do every day. But this work is about dancing on the edge of what you know, or what you expect, or what you consider true, or what you would do by default. It's a place where you need to experiment with a sense that things may go well or things might go wrong. And you can do it alone. You gather a group of people willing to roll up their sleeve and factions quickly surface. Group of people are in favor, people they're against, others they are okay with the status quo. They sense the danger and do an unspoken calculation of what's at stake the progressives make. The risk of that they may lose status, appear incompetent, disappoint people they care about, look bad. Inevitably, conflict arises. Your job will be to orchestrate the conflict, as people in this work become fearful their expertise, authority, security being challenged, insufficient, or not helpful. Yet, the work of leadership here is holding people through this loss. Imagine having a hand on a thermostat, turning the heat up and down to keep people fired up enough around purpose without having them boil over at their own source of uncertainty. Finally, you reach a sweet spot of leadership, where innovation flows and people start asking new questions, speaking the unspoken, questioning their own assumptions, test driving novel practices, building fragile new partnerships across organizational lines. And in doing this, they start making progress on critical issues, together.
Having covered various leadership models, we'll next turn to discuss the concept of authority, and different sources of authority that can be used by leaders as they work under different leadership models. What is authority? Authority is defined by Heifetz at Harvard University as a power that is given to perform a service. In the case of government work, leaders can be given a position, a title, status, access to resources and staff to manage. These are all forms of power that can be used to influence others. And the services that they must provide are the responsibilities that were set out in the job description. The most important factors to note about authority are that: first, it can be given and it can be taken away. For example, a person can take on a particular role and job title that would give them power, but they can also leave that position to move to another position, in which case the authority granted to perform the functions of the first job are also taken away. Second, authority is conferred as part of an exchange. This means that, for example, citizens pay taxes and grant authority to the government so that it can provide services that they need, such as healthcare facilities or schools. They give in order to receive as part of an exchange. But where does this authority come from? Now, to dig a little deeper on understanding the use of authority by leaders, we will look at two different sources of authority that a leader may draw upon to influence and mobilize others to action. First, formal authority. This comes with various powers of the office of the job, and it is granted because the office holder promises to meet a set of explicit expectations, usually set out in their job description or in laws. The strength of the power depends upon the importance and the relevance of their position. Formal authority is finite. It is only valid within a specific time frame and usually only within a specific location. For example, a department head in government is only head for a certain time period, perhaps 3 or 4 years. And they have formal authority only within the department that they run. When they engage with staff in another department, they have no direct formal authority over the staff. On the other hand, there is informal authority. It does not rely on the person's position, but is given because of the personal qualities of how that individual is seen by others. Unlike formal authority, which can often be focused on compliance, informal authority can positively influence attitudes and behavior, motivating people to give additional effort and energy to their job. Informal authority tends to be built over time, based on behaviors and skills including level of competence to be able to get things done effectively, reliability and whether one keeps their promises, trust from others, acting respectfully to others and being respected by others, and acting with integrity and fairness. One example of informal authority can be a secretary. She doesn't have as much formal power as others, but if the office is run well, she will have great informal authority with the governor and other senior officials. The secretary is influential in terms of who the governor gets to see, what information they hear, and that can affect decision-making in a less direct way. Overall, typically managers have formal authority and use that. On the other hand, leaders tend to use informal authority, even if they have no formal authority. If they do also have formal authority, they can draw on both their formal and informal authority, which can be a highly powerful combination for influencing and motivating people to do things. So, as we look back on the various leadership models we have covered in this lesson, we can see there are some commonalities between most of them. They involve a shared goal. Many leaders will work towards creating public value and contributing towards serving the needs of others. They'll work with others to develop common ground, a common purpose and a shared goal that many can have a common commitment to achieving. Shared power. A leader is not the sole person with power, particularly in the case of large and complex reform agendas that require the contributions of many to achieve the goal. It's often most effective when many minds come together and bring a variety of experiences, perspectives and knowledge to find a way forward to overcome challenges. Enabling others. A leader is an enabler of others' work and success. They strive to help others become inspired, motivated, engaged. They also help to open up opportunities for others to enhance their skills and develop professionally. It's also important to note that when we're looking at leadership models, we can see that the how matters, that is, how things get done. The goal is not just about what gets done, but how it actually gets done. Results should be achieved with integrity, ethically, with respect for others and their contributions. Upon reflection of the different leadership models covered within this lesson, some common traits of effective leaders can be drawn. These are a mix of personal qualities and behaviors. The common personal characteristics of effective leaders include listening to really understand, not just to respond. Good leaders are keen listeners who ask pertinent questions. Are passionate about what they are doing and those they are trying to help, as well as compassionate to their staff and those they are trying to serve. Are courageous and take necessary actions even when they are unpopular. Are self-aware, such that they are able to see their own flaws to keep them in check and develop skills, and are aware of their own strengths to put them to good use. Inspire, motivate, encourage and mobilize to action. Highly competent in their sector of expertise to garner trust, respect and effectiveness. Are trusting and trustworthy to strengthen collaboration within their teams and when working across agencies. The common personal behaviors of effective leaders include being able to diagnose the real problem, and are visionary in developing a solution. Being keen to engage others in collaborative processes to expand the opportunity for reaching a well-informed decision, as well as encouraging others to have buy-in to the decision and its implementation. Leading by example. Considerate modeling of positive behaviors will have an impact on how others act, and on the reputation of how the team and agency is perceived by others, as well as creating a positive work environment where people are positively engaged in the workplace each day. Building consensus and managing conflict. Since most effective implementation comes from a consensus on what to do, and since most teams are unlikely to make it through a project without any conflict, skills in managing team conflict are important to keep the team moving forward. Going back to the questions you answered about leadership at the start of this lesson, now try to identify which model of leadership each leader was exercising in those situations. What does leadership mean to you? What model is your default understanding of what you expect leadership to look like? When have you seen an example of effective leadership and what did that look like to you? What leadership model was used here? When have you seen an example of failed leadership and what did that look like to you? What leadership model was used here? What behaviors would you like to see more of in your leaders? Is there a model that you are drawn to and would like to practice more of yourself, or you would like to see other leaders practice more? As we come to a close for this lesson, it's helpful to sum up the session. When working in government, civil servants exercise leadership to create or enhance public value, that is, they exercise leadership to contribute value to the way that society functions so they can improve living conditions for others. Basically, the role and purpose of every civil servant's position in one way or another. There are a variety of different leadership models that can be used. These include transformational leadership, servant leadership, collaborative leadership, heroic leadership and adaptive leadership. Leadership is most effectively exercised when there is a shared goal to serve the needs of others, shared power across the team organization to get things done, and with the leader acting as an enabler where leaders trust and support the development of their staff. In the next slide you will see a quote from Lao Tzu that captures these points well. Authority is a resource. Increasing one's own informal authority helps to strengthen professional and personal effectiveness, capabilities to influence others, and abilities to exercise leadership. Leadership is an activity, not a position. It is not necessary to hold a formal leadership title or position in order to exercise leadership. Leadership can be exercised wherever one sees a need that is unmet to serve others. This type of leadership can draw on formal and/or informal authority leadership. In closing, an important message across many of the leadership models is enabling and empowering others. A Chinese quote from Lao Tzu captures this well: "A leader is best when people barely know he exists. When his work is done, his aim fulfilled, they will say, 'We did it ourselves.'" We thank you for your participation in the CE Learning lesson. We would like to ask you to complete a mini quiz on this lesson. We will see you again in the next lesson.